welcome to the Church Society podcast. You'll see this week that we have gained an extra guest. So on my screen I've got Lee Gatiss underneath me, and next to me I've got Aled Seago. Aled, just tell us who you are, what you do, what lockdown is looking like for you.
Great, so my name's Aled. I'm a curate in Chester Diocese, and I'm curate of the parish of Poynton, which is in between Stockport and Macclesfield. We've been in interregnum since October, so my busy life is still being very busy. Been here since, I was ordained in July 2018 from Oak Hill, and at the moment, lockdown, I spend a lot of time filming and splicing together videos, because the way we do our services is we pre-record them during the week, I splice them together, and we then put them out on YouTube and Facebook as a kind of premiere thing on a Sunday, so that people aren't just watching me. We get to have different people doing different things. And so far, so good. But yeah, I've had to learn how to become a film editor very quickly.
Haven't we all? It's the technological skill in the clergy of the Church of England has increased exponentially in the last few weeks, I think. Good. Well, we've got a number of things on our list to discuss this morning, and I want to start with the announcements that were made last week concerning General Synod. There's also been an announcement about Living in Love and Faith. We talked about these a couple of weeks ago when we weren't quite sure what was happening. I think it's fair to say we're still not quite sure what's happening. But the Living in Love and Faith resources, publication of those has definitely been delayed, and I think we're expecting those to come out in the autumn at some point now. There's also been a letter sent to members of General Synod letting them know that there won't be a physical meeting in July, which seems very sensible. There is a problem. They would like to be able to conduct the meeting of General Synod online, but they aren't allowed to do that unless General Synod have agreed that they can do that, which they can't do because they're not allowed to meet online. So they have instead said that they're going to explore with the government the possibility of Parliament passing legislation to enable the Synod to transact its business remotely. Lee, why are Parliament involved in this? You know, we're deciding what to do about Church Society AGM, and we're not asking Parliament to pass a new law to allow us to do that differently. Why is that happening for General Synod?
Indeed, it's the Privy Council also have to be involved in this, of course, and Lord President of the Council, Jacob Rees-Mogg, will be calling together a meeting of the Privy Council, which meets every month. It's because we're an established church. Essentially, the Church of England is not just a voluntary organisation, of which there are many in this country who can do what they like as long as they can get a certain number of people together to decide. We're part of the apparatus of the whole of the British nation and state. So Parliament have a role in setting up our rules of governance, and so General Synod is essentially part of Parliament. It's like the House of Parliament, you see. So in order for it to change the way it does things, its standing orders for how it makes decisions, whether they can do that virtually or in real life face-to-face meetings, that all has to go through Parliament and the Privy Council. I think members of Synod have been asked if they're happy to do this kind of thing. So the letter that went out to them recently asked them to state their opinion on that subject. But also the Privy Council will have to take a decision as to whether the Synod can change the way it does things. Yeah. If it can do that in May's meeting, then possibly in July some business could be transacted by the Synod. But if not, then we're hoping that the November sessions, which would have been the first ones of the new General Synod, that those will be the new sessions where the Synod can make some decisions and comments and questions.
Yeah, so you mentioned that in November we were expecting to have had General Synod elections this summer for a new General Synod, which would meet for the first time in November. Now, there's already been some confusion about what that might mean, because General Synod is elected by deanery synod reps. Certainly the House of Laity is. House of Clergy obviously elected by clergy. Some churches had their APCM before lockdown and elected their deanery synod reps, but most churches hadn't. And so it was a question of who is going to be able to elect. And the hope again in this letter that's stated is that all of that will be delayed for 12 months. So the next General Synod won't be elected until 2021, and hopefully by then churches will have been able to have an APCM, will have elected their deanery synod reps, who will then elect this new synod. And that is again a thing which Privy Council have to agree that could be done, but assuming that they agree, and I can't see Privy Council really having a problem with that, but assuming they agree, that means that the existing General Synod will meet potentially in November and again in February next year and again in July next year, after the Living in Love and Faith resources have been published. So they'll have potentially 3 meetings where they're able to discuss those and see where that goes forward. And we had thought that it would really be the new synod that would be the ones who would get to engage with that. I don't know whether you have any sense, either of you, whether that is a significant difference, what implication that might have for how the resources are received, for what next steps might happen. I don't know what we think.
We just don't know, because we don't know the relative strength of the different parties within the church. I don't like talking that sort of way, but that's the way it is at the moment, and what things might be like next September when the elections will finally happen, God willing, for the new synod. We know that the current synod is stuffed full of revisionists who would like to change the church's approach to human sexuality, marriage, transgender, and all those issues. We don't know whether the new synod, when it finally gets elected, will be slightly different in terms of its balance of views on that subject. Perhaps it will give us a little bit longer as evangelicals and as Orthodox Anglo-Catholics and others who are wanting to stick with the church's canonical position, Canon B30 on marriage, and our stated views on sexuality from the Higton Motion of 1987, the Lambeth Conference of 1998. It may be that a new synod will be more conservative on those issues. It will give us a bit longer to galvanise people to stand who have those views. We don't know.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it would be worth saying, we have been trying to encourage people to think about standing. Even if all you think you could do is stand as deanery synod rep, please do that. And please make sure that your church's quota of deanery synod reps is full, so that you have more votes for General Synod. There is a website, I will put a link to that in the programme notes, helping people understand what's entailed in being in General Synod, why it's really important. CEC, the Church of England Evangelical Council, have been really working hard on trying to encourage more evangelicals to stand for General Synod. And if it, as it looks like that will be next year, then you just have more time to think about whether that's appropriate for you, or whether there's someone you know who you could encourage to stand. So I think that's probably
it's
all
so important.
Reasonably say about that at this point. We don't know a whole lot more than the official advice. So I want to move on to a second subject, which is something people have been thinking about quite a lot in the last few weeks. I wrote a blog post on this a couple of weeks ago, which had a lot of positive feedback, and we've also been putting a number of posts from it. We did an issue of Crossway on this a couple of years ago that we've been putting up on the blog, thinking about the issue of mental health. It is something that a lot of people are really noticing as we're going through this sort of lockdown period and the anxiety associated with coronavirus, that it is having an impact on people's mental health. And Aled, I wanted to ask you, because I know this is something you've thought about a lot and have some experience of yourself. Why is it, do you think, that lockdown is having an impact on people's mental health? What are some of the issues that people are going to be struggling with?
There'll be all sorts of things, really. So the future is very much up in the air. So that's causing a lot of anxiety. Extroverts are struggling with being locked down. Introverts are also struggling, speaking as one, because whether you're in a household that you can't escape from, or whether that's actually you do like to see people sometimes, especially if you're someone like me who, even though I'm an introvert, gets a lot of encouragement from fellowship. For those who have strong church families and they're part of congregations that really see themselves as a family, that is a massive cut-off, especially because, you know, we're encouraged to gather together and we are not allowed to do so, which is an interesting question for us as Western Christians, I think, because we're now in a situation where many of our brothers and sisters have been for years and they haven't complained as loudly as we have. That's just something to
it's very interesting, isn't it? Some Christians have been living with this for many, many years in different regimes. Yeah, good point.
So I think anxiety is a big one, whether you're anxious about catching the virus or you're anxious for loved ones, especially if you have elderly relatives or people in the vulnerable category. And just, there's an uncertainty. It almost feels like a lot of the kind of comforting things that we had, the rug has been pulled quite strongly from most of us. And it was interesting, in our service yesterday, one of our associate ministers was leading, and he said, it's interesting that solitary confinement is described as one of the worst punishments you can ever give someone. And for a lot of us, that's now what's going on.
Yes. I mean, I think it's not quite the same as solitary confinement in a prison, but you know, most of us are able to at least have phone contact or internet contact, and most of us are still in a position where we're still allowed to occasionally go to the shops and do whatever. But you're right, it is not a good thing for us to be alone. I mean, you know, we're told that in Genesis too, aren't we? It's not good for the man to be alone, and loneliness is not a good way to live. So we shouldn't be surprised, I think, that actually the situation that we are in is having an impact potentially on people's mental health. What sort of things might we look out for if we're not sure whether we're struggling with this, if we want to keep an eye on our mental health? What sort of signs might we look for as, I guess, warning signs, things just to notice and think, maybe I should do something differently, maybe I should take some action here, this doesn't seem right?
Yeah, so there'll be very simple things. So your sleep pattern, your eating pattern, is that going up or down? We are, by nature, we're using screens a lot more than we used to, but we'll be using them even more now. And I don't know all the science behind it, but there is this whole debate about whether Zoom is having a negative effect on us emotionally, all that sort of thing. If you find that you're stopping enjoying what you usually enjoy, obviously there'll be certain hobbies that we're used to, but we can't do. So again, associate minister friend is really into mountain biking. He can't do that. But certain things that we enjoy, like say, even little things like, oh, there's a particular telly program that I really like. Oh, I've gone off that now. Which does happen, you know, it does happen. Like, you know, I used to love Doctor Who, but suddenly, you know, the way it's going these days.
But if it's a pattern, if it's all the things that you normally would enjoy, you're suddenly finding you're not really enjoying, then that's concerning.
Yeah, and especially like if you're someone who's used to kind of saying how you feel, but just kind of becoming more withdrawn. A lot of it is just, I don't think we're that good at self-examination. I've had to learn it the hard way. But for a lot of us, I think our default is to just carry on, and we just like, oh, I'm not depressed, I don't feel sad.
Yes. And it's more complicated, isn't it, than that? In the post that I wrote a couple of weeks ago, and I will put a link to this, one of the things that I used for a number of years, just an online mood tracker. And it's just a really helpful practice to get into, just to check in with yourself and ask yourself those questions and see, you know, is there a trend? You know, are you kind of stable, or is there a sort of upward trend or a downward trend? And if so, is there something that you need to do about that? Because as you say, most of us are not very aware. For me, it's really obvious. You can tell when I'm really struggling because I won't do the washing up for weeks. And you know, there are other signs too, but that's one really obvious thing. You can tell if there's just a huge pile of washing up that I haven't been able to bring myself to do. That's a sign that I'm not really okay. So yeah, people need to learn to look out for those kind of signs. And if somebody does notice actually they are struggling with sleep, their eating patterns are changing, they're not enjoying stuff, they're withdrawing from other people, they're noticing that actually there are concerning signs. What would we recommend people do in response to that? So you know, it's one thing to notice the problem, but actually then is there anything you can do about that?
Well, it's a tricky one, because a lot of us will find different things helpful than others. So one of the things that Mark Maynell does in his book on depression is he says every case is unique.
Yeah.
You know, it's very hard to sort of like have here's a universal experience, but there are common things. So the things that I do is I have people who I check in with, which obviously I have to do remotely now. But I have the Northern Regional Director of Church Society, George Crowder, happens to be a very good friend of mine. He was my boss before college, so he's someone I check in with every month, and he knows me well enough to be able to just spot things that I can't spot. And I have a couple of other people I do that as well with. But that's all. It's all good saying that if you've got those contacts. If you don't have those contacts, it's tricky.
And if you're not feeling great, that's often the hardest time to be able to establish that sort of pattern, isn't it? And reach out to people to actually have the capacity to do that might not be.
So I guess with that, we need to start encouraging people. If you have people in your lives that may be susceptible to this, you need to make the first move and check in with them, because they might not do it for you. You know, it's okay for me because I can spot patterns now, and my wife's very good at spotting them as well. But you know, maybe have a think this week. Who are people in my life who you think, maybe they need a call or a text or anything. Sometimes texting's better. I know we always say better to do things on the phone, but for some people, texting is a very easy way of talking without getting too emotional and feeling rubbish.
And then you can begin to assess, actually, you know, this person seems completely fine, or maybe there is a bit more to it. Maybe I'll message them and say, actually, would you like to have a phone call with that? Thing to do. As a first step. Lee, what about you? What things do you find you're doing now and in general that help you stay healthy emotionally and mentally?
I think the government's given good advice in terms of get out and have some exercise every day. And so getting out, I mean, particularly now when the weather is so beautiful, mostly we can go out, see the amazing variety in nature and enjoy that. I think that is something that the government were very wise to encourage us to do, and we ought to do that more. I think it's nice that the government are giving us a daily update on how things are going. However, I find that if I have spare 5-10 minutes, I used to just check the news, but now I don't. I will have a time when I check the news during the day, and I'll stick to that. But other times when I have just free moments, I think, what should I do? What should I do? Should I read my Bible for 5 minutes? I will not check the news.
I think that's really wise.
Back to myself. However, I can on my TV just turn on YouTube, and I've discovered the joys of postmodern jukebox. And if you've got a spare 5 minutes, or if you're just watching, you want to watch something while you're cooking dinner or something, I have the kitchen set up where I can chop all the vegetables and also watch TV. I'll stick on the postmodern jukebox rather than watching Sky News or BBC iPlayer News or something like that. I think that is a much better thing to do, rather than having this coronavirus wave crashing over you all the time.
Something I did really early on, I think like the first day of lockdown, on Twitter, I muted coronavirus and COVID and virus. And because I don't need to have the news repeated to me 100 times over. You know, I need to know what's going on, but I don't need to see it again and again and again. And I just found actually that has made life much more manageable. I think, Aled, you may have there with you possibly another helpful thing. If you mental health, you probably need a dog, don't you?
Well, yeah, dogs are a blessing and a curse in many ways. You know, they interrupt your videos, and So one of the things I do is I make a video every day for church people and whoever to just watch on Facebook, going through the Bible. But I also do a little kids one once a week where my holiday club alter ego, Stupid Man, which stands for super terrific, unstoppable, perfect, incredible, dangerous man, of course. And the dog enjoys dancing when I'm trying to play a song, and the outtakes are funnier than the actual finished product. But there you go. But yeah, having the dog is an excuse to get out, because he will moan if we don't take him out. And so the interesting thing is, since lockdown, I'm actually walking more than I used to, because it would be get up, get in the car, drive to church, do morning prayer, sit in the office, come back, sit in my desk, blah, 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 blah. So actually, I'm exercising a lot more than I used to. And
Good.
Especially now that our hour a day has been extended.
Yeah, go as often as you like.
Yeah, exactly.
I know. Judging by the people on the public footpath just outside my window, a lot of people are walking more than they used to. I'd
have to say, as a father, that kids also moan, don't take them out once a day or something as well. So they're also quite useful in that.
Yes, no, I think that's right. I do want to say that these are really good things to do, and I certainly have, just a sort of daily list of checks. Have I spoken to a person today? Have I been outside today? Have I gone to bed at a good time? And those kind of things. I do want to say as well, though, that if you're somebody who feels like you're really struggling at the moment with anxiety or with depression or some other kind of mental ill health problem, do talk to your doctor. You might not be able to get to see your GP at the moment, but you should be able to get a phone appointment, and they can over the phone do an assessment and see whether actually you're suffering from more than just feeling a bit rubbish, but actually some kind of clinical level of mental health. And they probably can't refer you for talking therapy at the moment, but they may well be able to prescribe medication. And if you need medication, then you need medication. And you should definitely talk to your doctor about that if you think. I just remember the first time I was diagnosed with depression, being in the doctor's office, and they'd done the little test, and she came back and she said, well, it looks like you've got moderate to severe depression. And it was just the biggest relief to know that I hadn't just been making it up, and that I wasn't just being a bit feeble, and I should just be able to pull myself together and get on with it. So if you think that you might be struggling more than normal, then do talk to your GP about it at the moment. And we haven't really talked about the spiritual aspect of mental health, but it is also something we should be taking care of our spiritual health, and reading our Bible and praying. And it's hard because, as Aled said, we're cut off from our church families, but we can interact to some extent with one another, and we can certainly be trusting in the Lord at the moment. But all of those things, our physical well-being, our exercise, our eating, our sleeping, our social interaction, and our spiritual health all play into our emotional, mental well-being. So I will put some links to things about that in the notes as well. But please, if you're struggling, do try and reach out and get some help, even at the moment. Good. Finally, furlough. So news has come out in the last week or two from not every diocese, but I've seen it certainly in one or two dioceses, but there may well be more coming, that have been asking curates to consider volunteering for furlough. And my initial thought was, I don't really think that's what the furlough scheme is for, but I went to it. Somebody pointed me towards the official advice, and actually the government advice is pretty broad and vague, and I think it probably therefore is okay. It's for any employer whose operations have been severely affected by coronavirus. Well, I think you can say the church's operations have been pretty severely affected by it. To retain their employees and protect the economy, all employers are eligible to claim under the scheme, and the government recognises different businesses will face different impacts from coronavirus. And certainly if you're in a church where the majority of your giving comes in sort of cash and immediate donations on the plate, then you won't have been having any of those for the last 7 weeks. You might then be in a position where you can't pay a sort of monthly payment towards your parish share. Dioceses, as we know, many of them were already in a financially pretty precarious position prior to all of this, and so then if they're not getting that monthly payment of chair from all of their churches, may well be in a pretty immediately precarious financial position, and all of them will be recognising this is going to have more long-term effects on their money. So we can see why they might be thinking, should we go to furlough? Why would you think they picked curates as the appropriate people to consider for furlough? Who else? I mean, dioceses employ quite a lot of people, don't they?
Well, I think I've seen some people saying, why shouldn't we just furlough all the bishops? And not just for the next few months. But I think that the reason that curates are in the target for this is that they are not office holders in the same way as others. So bishops and ordinary ministers on common tenure or freehold in the Church of England are office holders, and that is a technically different form of employment, if you like. It's a different status than being an employee of an organisation. Now,
although it's
I don't think curates
clear,
are quite employees of the organisation of the Church of England
that's
either.
true, but it is very clear on the government's page about furlough that furlough can be applied to office holders just as much as employees. It doesn't exclude them from the scheme. So I think if that's the reason, that is an excuse rather than a reason.
I think that is what I've seen given in places, and that's why they've done that. Also, I think there's something, if you forgive the worldly terminology, low-hanging fruit, is that often those in training at the junior level, sorry, Alex, are considered low-hanging fruit as slightly more unnecessary than those who are in charge.
So Aled, as someone who is a curate,
whether that's true or not, in many places, particularly in Aled's case, for example, the curate during an interregnum.
So Aled, I mean, you are in a slightly different situation because you're covering an interregnum. But even so, you're a curate. You have wardens who are technically in control of the, responsible for the church at the moment. I mean, do you feel that curates should be furloughed? I would have said you were a key worker. Clergy are key workers, aren't they?
Yeah, and I guess it's hard to comment, particularly because I'm from Chester Diocese. Money isn't really an issue for us that I'm aware of. I'm not really involved in diocesan finance because I failed my maths GCSE, so they wouldn't want me. And it'd be tricky for people like me because we don't have a vicar. And even though I'm not in charge, I'm doing a lot of the day-to-day stuff, especially now where retired clergy have basically been taken out of any action apart from phone call based pastoral ministry. And we do have 2 associate ministers, but for good reasons, we've said that they shouldn't be doing funerals. So if for example, I was furloughed, we wouldn't have that many virtual services would take a lot longer to put up, and we wouldn't be able to do any funeral ministry at all. And I know that in my cohort of curates, I'm one of 3 who is in vacancy during their curacy. So that would be very tricky. And I guess curacies are meant to be humbling things because, as I was told by my rural dean, who is chair of Fellowship of Word and Spirit, that curates are the servants of all and master of none. So from that point of view, I guess if I've been there on social media and via WhatsApp saying, oh, curates, we're treated like this, blah 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 blah. But it's tricky. It's very hard for someone like me to know the decision-making process that went into those things. I can't imagine it would have been a fun meeting where that was suggested. And I guess it just shows, goodness me, they must be in so much desperate trouble to make those decisions.
Yes, and there may be some curates in a position, for example, if you've got a spouse who is working in a full-time key worker job, sort of somebody working for the NHS or something like that, and you've got small children at home, and you might be saying as a curate, you know what, it would be really great if I was furloughed, I could just focus on looking after the children, doing the home education, not having to also try and hold down my full-time job at the same time. So in all sorts of situations, things will be very different. The needs of people's churches will be different, and so on. But it does I do feel somewhat concerned that they felt that was the appropriate protocol, and I would have been encouraged or reassured perhaps to have heard that they were also asking, for example, some of the many admin and support staff employed by dioceses and diocesan officers to consider whether actually they also could appropriately be furloughed at the moment. I used to work for a diocese. I was an online pastor. I imagine if he was still doing that job, there would be an awful lot to be getting on with at the moment. But some diocesan officer roles, I'm not sure are quite as central to the ongoing ministry of the church right now as perhaps the role of some curates dealing with immediate pastoral crises and, as you say, funeral ministry and those kind of things.
Curates and ministers are frontline staff, and I think diocesan staff is backroom staff.
Yeah.
Some of the backroom stuff is essential for the ongoing work of the front line, but some of it is not. Some of it is they are luxury posts, if I can put it that way, and they are the low-hanging fruit, not the curates. I think there is also a question about whether we want to use the government's furlough scheme to pay for ministry in churches, because what the government is doing is borrowing from the future in order to pay for keeping people going through this current crisis. So if you apply that to the furlough scheme, if it applies to ministers, curates, for example, what we are doing there is paying for current ministry in churches by borrowing from the nation in the future. And I think there's a question about whether that's the right thing to do, and whether it should be the whole nation.
Yeah, so interesting question.
Also, whether curates can survive on only 80% of the money. But I know that that's not always the case. Some dioceses are going to top that up to 100%. Yes. But there are questions of detail that are important to consider whether to go on the furlough scheme or not.
There really are. So, I mean, lots of employees who are on 80% furlough are saying, well, I'm saving lots of money on travel costs and so on. But actually, if you're a curate, you're working from home. You're not saving on, a 20-mile commute every day. I'm just going to mention one thing. We need to wrap up, really. But I just wanted to let people know, obviously, one of the issues with being on furlough is that you are not then allowed to volunteer for the organisation you normally work for. That's quite complicated if the organisation you work for is your church, because normally we would expect people who are members of a church to be volunteering for that church. Edward Connor solicitors, who are Christian solicitors, have produced some really helpful advice. It is only advice. It doesn't constitute sort of, legal binding advice, but it really helpful advice for people just to work through if you are somebody who's been furloughed from a church or a Christian organisation, what things it might still be appropriate for you to do and what things you mustn't do in order to be abiding by the rules of the furlough scheme in an appropriate and godly kind of way. So I'll put a link to that below as well. Just as we finish then, I'm liking the different things that we're getting from our guests each week, recommendations, things you've been enjoying, things you've been encouraged by. So I'm just going to ask you, Aled, we're going to start with you. Have you got anything you'd like to suggest to people?
There's a few things. So this is going to sound very, very egotistical, but if you like daily videos and you like Gatiss as well as others, there are plenty of other video resources out there, but I'm doing something called Daily Dose of Joy, which I do every day, designed to keep your joy healthy in lockdown, where I'm going through various bits of the Bible. We're doing Isaiah 40 to 55 at the moment. Right. So, because I am convinced that in my testimony with these things, that the nature of God, so the doctrine of God, is incredibly pastorally helpful. So I'm recommending 2 books. There is this one, Spurgeon's Sorrows, Realistic Hope for Those Who Suffer from Depression. This is the best thing I've read on depression. It's excellent. And then coupled with that, a Doctrine of God book, His Love Endures Forever, Reflections on the Love of God by Gary Williams. Very thorough, but also very simple. Talking of very thorough and very simple, last one, I recently bought this for my goddaughter for her birthday.
I think we've already recommended that once on the podcast.
Excellent.
It's lovely.
Good. God is greater than our feelings is one of the devotions in this thing.
Lovely.
So I bought a copy for my goddaughter and I liked it so much I bought one for me because,
Thoughts to make your heart sing. Yeah, no, that's a great recommendation.
Good
Lee, what about
resource for
you?
low-hanging fruit like me.
What have you been enjoying lately?
Well, there may be some good books that you could buy. I don't know if I can recommend any in particular to you, but I've read John Lennox's book on Where is God in a Coronavirus World. I think that's a very helpful reflection on the current situation.
Great.
There is a new book which I haven't read yet, which I'm keen to get hold of. So if anyone wants to send it to me, very, very happy to receive that. IVP have published a collection of reflections called Healthy Faith and the Coronavirus Crisis. And I think I heard that Matt Searles has written a book in a chapter in there on the Psalms and turning to the Psalms in a time of crisis, and I'd love to read that. So I think that those sorts of things. I'm reading the Bible again in a different version. I'm reading Robert Alter's translation of the Hebrew Bible, which is a big fat 3-volume thing, but really interesting. He's written on the art of biblical narrative and poetry, and I think he's a really interesting take on the Hebrew Bible and how to translate that.
Yeah, I agree.
I've been enjoying that, so I'd recommend it.
Big fan of Robert Alter over here. I'm just going to recommend one thing, but it's a book. I think it's only just come out. I bought it for Kindle last week. If you're not a digital book reader, you may have to wait a little while before it can be delivered. That is Dane Ortland, Gentle and Lowly. There you go. Look, Aled's even got thing. I've only got a Kindle, so I didn't bring it to show you, but he'll show you the cover. An exploration of the compassionate heart of the Lord Jesus, and I am being really encouraged by not just his exploration of that from the Bible, but also insights from Puritans and others going through that, and I'm finding that's really encouraging me at the moment, so I commend that to you. Good. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not consider if there's one friend that you think, yeah, they'd be really helped and encouraged, maybe somebody you think it'd be helpful for them to hear discussions around mental health, or somebody you know who's a curate and wondering what they should do if they're asked to furlough, somebody you know maybe who was thinking about standing for General Synod, then do send them the link to this episode of the podcast and encourage them to listen to it. I'll be back again next week. Thanks so much for watching and or listening.